So this is the beginning of starting your vest, and your first step is to add fusing to the appropriate front-facing pieces. So you should have two front-facing pieces, and you're going to add fusing only to those two pieces on this garment. Those are the only two pieces. And so here I'm actually pinning the front-facing piece to the vest front-facing lining. So this is the lining and the front facing going together, and these are the two pieces that are on the inside of the vest. You're going to sew these two together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and when you're done you're going to just open the seams up and then press them open, and that just makes that seam on the inside lie flat. You may also want to you may want to pin these two pieces together, just because of the shape of the two pieces at the seam. It does help if you pin them just to keep the shape and help keep the lining from sliding from under the piece that you're sewing, or if it's on the other side, it just kind of keeps the two fabrics a little more secure. You may also want to, when you finally get to the next step, I'll remind you, may want to clip into one of your pieces a little bit just to keep the curve shape. But I'll wait till I finish sewing this to point that out. Okay, so now you see where I have sewn that seam. You see where it does tend to want to roll in a little bit. And if you turn it over, you can see the seam inside, and it does tend to lay to one side. So that's why I recommend that you just go ahead and press it open to get it to lie a lot flatter. So that's all I'm doing there. I'm just using my finger to kind of open up the seam, and then just go ahead and press that open. And the next step is sewing your vest front piece to the front facing. You're also going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, and you see that you do have a curve in the middle there where where you are attaching the two pieces. That's the area I said you may want to clip into a little bit after you've sewn the seam, just to keep that curve a lot rounder. So you want to sew this at a 1/2 inch, and then you want to understitch towards the inside of the vest facing when you're done here. And I still like to go back and just check to make sure my pieces are lined up. With some of these shapes of the seams, I just like doing that just to make sure nothing has slid out of place. And like I said, I usually will pin it, but sometimes you're able to do it without, but I still like to check to make sure. Okay, so now you should have one of your vest fronts attached. Now I'm going to go ahead and understitch that piece, where I'm understitching towards the inside of the vest, or the facing, the seam that I just sewed to attach the vest front to the facing. Okay, so I'm just checking to make sure my seam allowance is laying in the proper direction for understitching. So still checking, I'm getting really close to that rounded point on the vest. And so understitching that, I just want to make sure, because I clipped into it a little bit, I want to make sure it doesn't roll to the other side. When you get to that point, it may tend to want to roll and go the other direction on your vest so that you don't catch it in the understitching. So that's why I like to keep checking at that point, because it may tend to alter itself when you get there. Okay, so you have attached the vest front and the facing and the inside facing lining, and you're going to do that for both sides of your vest. So you should have two pieces at this point that look like this, and then you're done for that step for attaching those pieces. The next step is sewing the linings in the back. So here I'm just trying to show you what everything should look like when you're done on the inside and then on the outside. So next what you want to do is sew your necklines together of your inner lining and outer lining, and these are your back pieces. And you're going to sew the neckline together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to understitch towards the inner layer. And when you're looking at your pattern pieces, the inner layer should have 2 notches at the top and at center back, and the outer layer should have 1 notch at center back, just to give you an idea of how to remember it. If you top stitch your label before this step, that kind of gives you a better idea of which part is your inner layer. But in this one, I actually do it after I sew the neckline seams together. So here I'm just attaching the neckline at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so this is a different fabric, but I wanted to show you after that step where I just went in and I top stitched my label onto the inner layer. And I did this because in the previous one I understitched it to the neckline and I didn't really like how that looked and I didn't think that would be appropriate, so I just wanted to demo doing the top stitching the proper way to get that in. When you top stitch your label, don't go further than 1 inch down from center back, so it shouldn't be further or lower down than that on your garment.